Luxury's a myth, but wait, there's more. Wanna swim?
Welcome back to the deep dive. Funny story. We were actually hoping to record this one live today from the Sancy Clubhouse at Overlook Village in Flanders.
Oh, yeah. How'd that go?
Yeah, well, turns out during business hours, it's basically off limits unless you're, like, management. So, yeah, scratch that idea.
Haha.
Figures. Right. But, hey, maybe more interesting than checking out the clubhouse is what's actually going on with the rents for people living there.
Yeah.
At Overlook Village and, honestly, in lots of other places, too.
Definitely more important.
So today, we're going to dig into something that I know is hitting a lot of you right in the wallet. These rent increases that just keep coming.
Mm-hmm.
And specifically, we're going to unpack Aion Management, that's pronounced Aion. They're the ones who run Overlook Village. And this recent lawsuit that, well, it might just explain why those rents keep going up.
And what's really interesting here for you listening, maybe especially if you are at Overlook or another Aion place, is that these rising rents, they aren't just happening out of nowhere. We've got this actual legal action now. A lawsuit from the New Jersey Attorney General, the Division of Consumer Affairs. And yeah, it names Aion Management directly.
Exactly. And that's really our mission for this deep dive. We're going to try and, break down this lawsuit. It's filed against a company called RealPage. They make property management software at a bunch of big landlords here in New Jersey, and management included.
Right.
Our goal is just to understand, okay, what are they actually accusing them of?
Yeah.
And maybe more importantly, what could it mean for you if you're a renter dealing with these hikes, especially, if you're in an Aion building.
We'll try to cut through the legal speak.
Yeah, definitely. Just focus on the key stuff. Okay, so let's get into it. What's the core accusation here?
Well, at its heart, like Attorney General Platkin laid out, it's a really serious claim.
Collusion.
Yeah. RealPage and these 10 big New Jersey landlords, Aion Management being one of them, they're accused of being part of this, illegal scheme to basically artificially jack up rents.
Okay, hang on. How would a scheme like that even work? Sounds pretty shady.
The claim is that these landlords all kind of agreed, okay, we're going to let RealPage's software, its algorithm, pretty much tell us what rent to charge.
Instead of figuring it out themselves.
Right. And not just that, they also allegedly shared, sensitive information with each other, stuff that wasn't public. The whole point, supposedly, was to avoid competing. Normally one landlord might drop prices a bit to fill apartments.
Yeah.
This was allegedly designed to stop that. Think of it like, all of the gas stations deciding together not to lower their prices, even if one could.
Okay, so instead of Aion Management maybe trying to make Overlook Village look a bit cheaper than the complex down the road to get you in, they were all sort of using the same game plan fed by this software to just push all the rents up together. Is that the idea?
That's precisely the allegation. And the lawsuit argues this breaks laws, both state and federal, that are meant to ensure fair competition and protect consumers like you.
Which laws are we talking about?
Specifically, they're citing the federal Sherman Act. That's a big antitrust law. The New Jersey Antitrust Act, which does kind of the same thing locally, preventing price fixing and monopolies.
Right.
And also the New Jersey Consumer Fraud Act.
Right. And the Attorney General, Platkin, he used some strong words, called it a cartel.
He did. Said they unlawfully lined their pockets at the expense of New Jersey renters who are already struggling.
Yeah, that language really hits home, doesn't it? Especially when you think about how tough the housing situation already is in New Jersey. Like, finding something affordable is hard.
It really is. The backdrop here is stark. New Jersey's already short something like over 200,000 affordable rental homes.
Wow.
And if you're in North Jersey, like where Overlook Village is, it's often even tougher. You have a really high percentage of renters who are cost-burdened.
Meaning they spend way too much of their income just on rent, right? Like over 30%.
Exactly. Way over that sometimes.
It just feels like you're stuck. I mean, the rent goes up, maybe way up, but you still need somewhere to live. It's not like buying a car where you can just say, too expensive, I'll wait.
That's the crux of it. Economists call it inelastic demand. You need shelter. So even if prices shoot up, the demand doesn't just vanish.
Yeah.
And that's what Acting Director Hollander was getting at too. She said the lawsuit's about stopping corporate greed at its worst. The claim is that normal market forces competition, keeping prices in check, were basically replaced by this software that was just designed to push rents higher than they would be otherwise.
Okay, so we've got RealPage, the software company down in Texas, Who are the actual landlords named in this suit along with them? You mentioned Aion Management.
Yeah, Aon's definitely on the list, but it's a roster of some pretty big names in New Jersey rentals. You've got Morgan Properties, Avalon Bay Communities, Campson Corp, LaFrac, Graystar Management, Cam Ebby's Management, Veris Residential, Russo Property Management, and Bizzuto Management Company.
That's quite a list.
It is. And together, these companies, they own and manage, tens of thousands of apartments right here in New Jersey. So we're not talking about small fish.
And again, for anyone listening who's at Overlook Village in Flanders, Aion Management, your landlord, is right there in the middle of this lawsuit.
Correct. And it's worth noting, the Attorney General also mentioned they believe there are other landlords, ones not named yet, who might have also been involved. So the investigation seems to be ongoing.
More could come out.
It's possible.
Okay, let's really get into this RealPage software then. You said it uses algorithms. What exactly is it supposed to do? And how did it allegedly, mess with competition? How could it lead to the kind of rent hikes people at Overlook might be seeing?
So RealPage calls this stuff revenue management software, or RM software. Basically, software designed to maximize the landlord's income from rent.
Makes sense from their perspective.
Sure. The specific products have names like YieldStar, AIRM, that's AI Revenue Management, and LRO, Lease Rent Options. These tools use algorithms, complex math formulas, and they crunch huge amounts of data to come up with suggested rent prices. Now, here's the really key part, according to the lawsuit. That data allegedly includes non-public, sensitive information shared between these competing landlords.
So, wait. It's not just looking at, what other apartments are listed for publicly nearby in Flanders?
The allegation is it goes way beyond that. By supposedly feeding this private competitor data into the algorithm, the lawsuit argues it stopped landlords, like Aion Management, from really competing on price.
How so?
Well, instead of maybe seeing a competitor has vacancies and deciding to offer a slightly lower rent at Overlook to attract tenants, the software, fueled by everyone's shared data, allegedly pushed everyone towards higher prices together. It created this environment where the incentive was to raise rents collectively, not undercut each other. That could absolutely impact affordability at places like Overlook.
RealPage sounds like they became a huge player in this space.
Oh, definitely. The lawsuit really emphasizes their market dominance. They have access to tons of proprietary data. The complaint even calls them the big tech of the rental housing world.
Wow.
And they apparently cemented that position back in 2017 when they bought out their biggest competitor, the company that made LRO.
Yeah, I see this quote here from someone who used to work at RealPage, a director. He said, if you have the data for the entire market and not enough availability, then everyone's price went up. It pushed pricing up across the board.
That seems pretty blunt.
It really does. It suggests RealPage knew exactly what their software could do to market-wide rents. The lawsuit even mentions a 2016 investor presentation where RealPage supposedly bragged about how widespread its software was, tying that directly to the ability to raise rents, like strength in numbers.
Okay, so the allegation is these landlords, Aion included, agreed to use this system.
Yeah.
But what did that agreement actually look like? How did they coordinate? How did this supposedly impact tenants at places like Overlook Village day to day? So the core claim is they basically made a pact, maybe not written down, but an understanding. We stop competing on price. Instead, everyone plugs into RealPage, uses its price recommendations, knowing or at least trusting that their competitors are doing the same thing. The lawsuit even says they allegedly work with RealPage and each other to keep apartments vacant in service of extracting unlawfully high rents.
Whoa, wait. Keep apartments vacant on purpose, just to keep prices high. That sounds backwards.
It does seem counterintuitive, right? Like, wouldn't Aion want Overlook Village to be full? But if the goal shifts from filling units to maximizing revenue per unit, and if you know your competitors aren't going to swoop in with lower prices because they're using the same software playbook, then maybe leaving a unit empty for a bit while waiting for someone willing to pay the higher software-dictated price makes financial sense in that specific context.
If everyone's doing it, yeah. That's messed up kind of logic.
And the alleged data sharing is the other big piece here. We're talking real-time info on occupancy rates, how many people are touring, new leases being signed, any deals or concessions being offered, pricing strategies, stuff companies normally guard closely.
How is that supposedly shared?
The lawsuit points to things like dedicated user groups for the software, industry meetings. Basically, places where these competitors could allegedly exchange this non-public information and coordinate. They even claim there were active efforts to recruit more landlords into the scheme,
Spreading the net wider.
potentially impacting more renters across the state, including those in Aion's buildings.
There's another quote here from a confidential witness, supposedly a former high-level manager at Greystar. Asked if landlords use RealPage to collude on rent prices, he apparently said, "Of course they did. It's the entire reason landlords use the software."
That's incredibly direct, a very strong claim about the alleged intent behind using this technology, which could directly influence what Aion tenants are charged.
Yeah. And it wasn't just internal stuff. Landlords were openly encouraging others.
The complaint alleges that, yes, providing testimonials, even videos, pushing other landlords to adopt RealPage to ensure they get the best price, don't leave money on the table. There's even a story about a RealPage webcast that got pulled down after the Washington Post started asking questions, where a landlord was apparently boasting about pushing rents up because occupancy was high thanks to revenue management.
And these user groups you mentioned, sounds like they weren't just for troubleshooting the software. They might have been central to this whole thing impacting rents at Overlook.
That's the allegation, that these user groups for LRO, YieldStar, ARM were places for direct exchange of this sensitive, non-public competitive info.
Like what?
Well, one example given is a discussion in the LR user group about how to handle the COVID-19 pandemic. Specifically, how to keep rents high, potentially by manipulating demand and supply forecasts within the software.
Seriously?
Yeah.
During the pandemic?
That's what the complaint alleges. It even mentions specific landlords, like Avalon Bay and Morgan, allegedly reaching out to RealPage to tweak software settings because of the pandemic's impact. It suggests a level of active collaboration that could definitely have affected rent prices for everyone, including Aion Management tenants.
Wow, so even during a global crisis, the allegation is they were working together to keep rents from falling, potentially hurting folks renting from Aion. The complaint also mentions weekly calls, emails.
Yeah, for the landlords using the LRO software specifically, there are claims of weekly calls with competitors, sharing stuff like current occupancy rates, how many people visited properties, how many new leases were signed that week.
That's very specific data to be sharing with competitors.
Extremely. And emails too, allegedly, between landlords like Avalon Bay, Bozzuto, Greystar, exchanging weekly traffic numbers, occupancy percentages, starting prices, concessions offered. It suggests a pretty detailed level of coordination that could easily influence rents at Aion properties and elsewhere.
So, okay, it wasn't just blindly following the software. There was this alleged layer of active communication and data swapping happening too, all potentially driving up rents at places like Overlook Village.
That's the picture the lawsuit paints.
Now, what about RealPage itself? What were their role besides just, supplying the software to companies like Aion? Were they just passive providers?
Not according to the lawsuit. It really emphasizes RealPage's alleged role in controlling and enforcing this whole system.
How so?
They apparently pushed hard for compliance and discipline. They allegedly told landlords, Aion included, that they needed to stick to the software's rent recommendations like 90% of the time or even more.
90%, so you couldn't really deviate much.
Deviations or overrides were reportedly frowned upon. You often had to justify them. It suggests the software wasn't just a helpful tool, it was more like the rule book. And landlords like Aion were expected to follow it, potentially impacting their pricing decisions at Overlook.
So the software wasn't just a suggestion box, it was more like marching orders that could have directly set the rent someone pays at Overlook Village.
That seems to be the implication. And they had features to make it easy. Things called autopilot and rent syndication could apparently just automatically take RealPage's suggested rent and push it right into the landlord's own management system and even out to listing websites.
Streamlining the process.
Exactly. And RealPage also had staff called pricing advisors who would talk to the landlords, like Aion Management. And if a landlord wasn't being compliant enough, these advisors could supposedly escalate the issue. It reinforced sticking to the program.
And they even did secret shops. That sounds intense.
Yeah, that's alleged too. RealPage supposedly sent people out, like secret shoppers, to make sure the landlord's leasing agents, maybe even staff at Aion properties, were only quoting the RealPage-generated rents and weren't trying to negotiate with potential tenants. There's even mention of a specific training manual made for Bozzuto that laid out how this secret shopping would work. Plus, the software itself had features allowing landlords to track their own compliance rates. It created this whole system of monitoring and accountability.
It really does sound like a very tightly controlled system, potentially affecting every rent quote at places like Overlook Village. Okay, so what was the alleged bottom line? What impact did this have on actual rent prices for people in New Jersey?
Well, RealPage itself apparently advertised that landlords using their software, companies like Aion Management, could see revenue boosts of anywhere from 2 to 7%.
2 to 7% just from using the software.
That was their pitch, according to the lawsuit. They cited case studies like Greystar supposedly outperforming their markets by almost 5% with YieldStar, claimed even better results, maybe another 1 or 2%, if they upgraded to ARM.
Okay, 2 to 7%. Maybe doesn't sound like a catastrophe number on its own,
But multiply that percentage across tens of thousands of apartments month after month, year after year. For companies like Aion Management across all their properties, including Overlook Village, it adds up to a lot of extra money potentially coming out of renters' pockets.
Yeah, that small percentage suddenly looks pretty big when you scale it up.
Yeah.
A significant financial burden.
Absolutely. And the complaint also claims RealPage advertised that the software helped keep rents high even when the economy was shaky. There's even an allegation that RealPage worked with landlords to create a feature specifically to help them use the software even where local rent control laws existed, basically trying to work around tenant protections.
Undermining rent control.
Yeah.
That's bold. And what about this sustainable occupancy thing you mentioned earlier? That sounds like another way prices could get pushed up at places like Overlook.
Right. The allegation is that this setting within the software actually encouraged landlords, Aion possibly among them, to keep some units empty rather than lower the rent to fill them quickly.
Prioritizing the highest possible rent over having every unit filled.
Exactly. There's even a quote attributed to the CEO of one participating landlord talking about how prioritizing revenue over occupancy was better financially. The lawsuit ultimately estimates that New Jersey residents have collectively overpaid millions of dollars in rent because of this alleged scheme. And that would, of course, directly hit tenants in Aion-managed building.
Millions. Okay, let's talk for a minute about the market itself. What made New Jersey, or these specific areas, potentially vulnerable to this kind of alleged scheme affecting places like Overlook Village?
The lawsuit looks at that. It talks about the market power these companies have, and also these things called plus factors, basically, conditions that make collusion easier or more likely.
Yeah.
First, they define the market. They're talking about leases in multifamily buildings, especially larger ones like Overlook Village. They argue other housing types, like single-family homes, aren't really direct substitutes for someone looking for an apartment in that kind of complex.
Right, and geographically, if you need to live near Flanders for work or family, you can't just easily move 2 hours away to find cheaper rent.
Right, exactly. The market is local, and the lawsuit notes that RealPage itself divides New Jersey into these local submarkets, including the one where Overlook Village sits. Aion Management operates within these specific local conditions.
So what are some of these plus factors that made collusion, as alleged, more likely?
Well, one is that highly inelastic demand. We talked about people need housing, so they can't easily walk away if prices go up. The market is also pretty concentrated. You have a lot of big landlords like Aion and the others named, all allegedly using the same RealPage software. It's also hard for new competitors to just jump in and build big apartment complexes. Costs are high, regulations are tough, land is limited.
Makes sense.
Plus, for renters, moving is expensive and a hassle. Those are high switching costs. The apartments themselves are often quite similar, standard floor plans, etc., which makes coordinating prices easier. And crucially, there was a huge financial motive for landlords to allegedly collude higher rents mean more profit. And, as we discussed, there were supposedly lots of ways to enforce the agreement.
So yeah, a whole mix of factors that could create fertile ground for this kind of alleged price fixing impacting renters at Aion's Overlook Village and elsewhere.
The lawsuit also gets into accusations of just unfair practices, right? Misleading people.
Yes, definitely. Under the New Jersey Consumer Fraud Act, they allege unconscionable commercial practices. This stems from the alleged collusion itself, the secret data sharing, but also how landlords allegedly interacted with renters. The lawsuit talks about the inherent power imbalance. Landlords have way more power than individual renters, and it accuses them of exploiting that.
How?
Things like using constantly changing prices, maybe driven by the algorithm, and creating exploding offers like rent this today or the price goes up tomorrow to create this false sense of urgency. That could certainly pressure tenants at Overlook Village.
And the idea that Aion and others were calling these rents market rate, that's a key point of contention. Huge point. The lawsuit alleges these rents weren't truly market rate because the market itself was allegedly rigged by the collusion. So calling them market rate was, according to the suit, a misrepresentation.
Were they also hiding the fact they used the software?
That's another major allegation. That landlords, potentially including Aion, were told not to tell renters they were using RealPage to set prices. There's even a quote supposedly from internal Bozzuto documents acknowledging that consumers would be frustrated if they knew the algorithm was setting the price. That lack of transparency definitely erodes trust, maybe for tenants at Overlook Village wondering about Aion.
Yeah, you'd feel kind of manipulated. I see this example here. Bozzuto apparently imposed a 30% rent increase in Hoboken and just told residents it was market rate. That's a massive jump, and it shows the potential scale of these alleged artificial increases that could theoretically happen at Aion properties too.
It's a stark example. And the lawsuit argues that even if a landlord did mention using software, they'd likely misrepresent it, saying it just helps find the market rate, rather than admitting it's designed to actively push prices higher.
So misleading either way.
That's the claim. And RealPage allegedly helped with this, giving landlords scripts on how to answer questions, doing those secret shops to make sure staff stuck to the potentially misleading message. The complaint even calls out specific advertising, like LaFrac advertising competitive prices while allegedly using the software designed to reduce competition, or Veris talking about commitment to an equitable housing market while allegedly participating in this scheme. These kinds of disconnects could certainly make renters question the fairness they're experiencing with companies like Aion Management.
Okay, so just to kind of wrap our heads around this lawsuit is basically saying there was this big coordinated effort. RealPage provided the tech, major landlords like Aion Management used it, shared data secretly, all allegedly to pump up rents beyond what a truly competitive market would allow.
That's the core allegation, yeah.
And for you listening, maybe you're a renter at Overlook Village or another Aion property, and you've seen those rents increases. This lawsuit suggests, well, maybe it wasn't just inflation or normal market stuff. Maybe this alleged collusion played a real part.
That's exactly the takeaway for you as a renter potentially affected by this. Those rent hikes you faced, the lawsuit puts forward a reason beyond just the market. It alleges potentially illegal coordination artificially inflated those prices.
And we got to stress again, right now, these are allegations. This is a lawsuit. It'll have to play out in court.
Absolutely. Nothing is proven yet. And the investigation is still going, apparently, so more could potentially come out, maybe involving other landlords, too.
Still, knowing all this, it definitely raises questions, doesn't it? Like, for you listening, maybe, especially if you're at Overlook, what does this make you wonder about how your rent is actually set? How much is market? How much might be something else?
It's a really important question. Does this information change how you view those rent notices? What actions, if any, feel appropriate to you now? It just really highlights how complicated the housing market can be and why understanding these hidden factors behind the cost of your home is so critical.
Welcome home to Overlook, managed by Aion. Rent high crooks, leaky ceilings, fees galore. Luxury's a myth, but wait, there's more. Wanna swim? Good luck with that. No lifeguards hired, another Aion fact. Clubhouse closed, reasons unclear. Management excuses served all year. Overlook Village rents never stop. New Jersey sued for collusion at the top. The only expert you'll find on the spot is Max, the office AI bot. What's that smell? Take your pick. Dog crap, sewage, or management tricks. It's now maintenance's fault. It's the lady at the top. Aion's greed sets the tone. Empanada guy secretly rules this place. Pure satire, but we love his face. Truth is rare, integrity forgot. Best employee here's an AI bot. Overlook Village rents in the sky. Promises empty, fees multiply. When humans fail and things get hot, trust no one but